Cool. We are live now. Thanks everyone for coming to another OpenJS Foundation Bootstrap Committee meeting. We are going to get things kicked off in a moment here, but to start off, if you are in the meeting, I am pasting a Google Docs link into the chat. If you've not already added yourself, or if your name is not already in that doc, if you could please add it as an, under attendance, that would be fantastic. Or sorry, under present, that would be absolutely fantastic, just so we can get an accurate understanding of who's in the meetings. Cool. So the OpenJS, let's get started on the agenda. So from OpenJS Foundation / Bootstrap, the first agenda item is OpenJS Foundation Executive Director job description. We went over this last time. I believe there was just like one other bullet that I had. It does look like this has progressed a bit. Does this still need to be on the agenda?
I don't think it does. You know, we've got the job description up. We've actually even interviewed one person already who expressed interest. So, and you know, we're meeting to work this along, and I think we've set up some work with a company who's going to do the pre-screenings for us. I think we're in good shape.
Can you add a link to the job posting?
I can do that. Just a moment to bring it up.
Cool.
I'm just hopping back on the call, so apologies if this has already been said, but should we remove the label and close that issue?
Yeah, that was the question we just asked. I believe that's what we are discussing. Does anyone have an objection to doing that? Oh, yeah.
Just so long as, you know, the description is easy to find elsewhere. I would want to make sure people could access it to share it.
Yeah, we want it broadly distributed. We're casting a very large net.
Yeah, just so that everybody kind of knows what the next steps are here. It seems like traffic on that ticket has cooled down pretty substantially. I did go through. I apologize to everybody who I thought you could see the changes that we were making, but apparently you couldn't. So I went through and accepted the various changes that have been proposed in the last meeting. If we do close this, can I take that as a sign that I can clean this up and put it on the website as a job description? Does anybody have any objections to that as a next step?
So I think we were just discussing removing it from the agenda. I don't know if we were discussing closing it yet. If we wanted to discuss that, we can.
It would be helpful if we could, please, because you know, at this point we'd like to move reasonably fast, and if there are no remaining objections, then let's maybe not hold off.
I'd
+1
that. I think it makes sense to close this issue, and then when the job posting is live, we can open a new issue to make it clear where people can find that. Otherwise, that's going to get lost. The signal for that will get lost in the noise of the discussion in this issue.
Agreed. I do just want to say, I'm looking at the issue, Brian, your comment about changing it to recommended rather than required, that totally makes sense. I just wanted, that was like the last open dangling thing there. So I just wanted to close that loop. If we close this and then once it's posted, open a new issue, do we actually want to pin that issue to the repository?
If you're suggesting opening that to the current Bootstrap repo, I think that's the place where it makes the most sense right now. We could also open issues various different places where it may make sense just to broadcast and advertise the job posting.
Okay. Cool. Sounds good. I will go ahead and close that issue. Okay, it is closed. Awesome. Moving on to the next agenda item. Just closing a bunch of tabs. Infrastructure mailing lists. This was opened by Brian.
Mm-hmm.
What is the current status of this?
So the lists are all open and popular, or well, populated at least with kind of initial people who I know to populate them with. We could probably remove the label on this one and just leave it as an open. We probably leave the ticket open at least, or the issue open. If anybody, as we get started, as we need mailing lists, just so long as everybody knows, just send me an email and I'll get them set up. I think we have the basic ones set up. Certainly we seem to have come to an agreement about the basics on, for example, CPC-private. And the various others. We have the escalation lists in place. Michael, thank you for catching my mistake on the one address of one of the mailing lists. Everything else, though, should be all set. I think we can probably remove this label. Anybody have any objections to that?
I'm not objecting to that. The one suggestion I'd have is, like, if our process going forward is going to be to email you to update or add mailing lists, we should probably have some sort of doc, probably not very long, in the OpenJS repo that says, mailing list management, here's the process. It's basically, put your request together and email this address, which is yours. Totally agree.
So I would say for that, we should probably have the person email operations@openjsf.org. I have that set up as just a general alias for whoever is doing operations on the project. I mean, right now, obviously, it's me, and that's the way it's going. But just for longevity, I set that up as a generic alias for stuff that needs to come to me.
Oh, it makes total sense.
Yeah. Two quick thoughts on this. One, perhaps it's time for us to spin up an admin repo within the OpenJS org for something like this. That may make more sense as a place for a document like that to live rather than in Bootstrap, and we can maybe start kind of transitioning some docs over there. It's a different agenda item we can bring up next week. The other thing I do want to say, though, is, like, as we write the process for that, I think it would be good if there's at least some sort of period of checking, like we have for making a new repo currently in the Node.js org. So, for example, for those who aren't part of the Node.js org, if you want to make a new repo, you post an issue in the admin repo, and I think you wait either 48 or 72 hours to make sure there's no objections, and then you can move forward. And this is just to make sure that there's no conflicts or problems and people have a chance to voice if there's any concerns. I think it would be good to have, some sort of checks and balance like that. Brian, even for yourself, just so that you don't have people having you spin up lists that we don't think are appropriate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was also going to suggest something like that. And I think an admin repo, I'd like to echo that, is a good approach to following that. And also holding that documentation that Michael mentioned.
Does anybody object to kicking off an admin repo, putting the charters in there that we have, the project progression proposal, as well as a code of conduct?
That makes sense to me.
Makes sense. I just think we'll want to try and maybe rewrite a bit in the READMEs about, what makes sense to go in the admin repo versus the Bootstrap repo for anybody, just go into it.
Okay. Do we want to make an issue and start collecting details and then kick it off next week?
Yeah, I think, like, the charters may not move, right? Because we talked about renaming the Bootstrap to CPC, so that charter might stay, but certainly things like this email process and the code of conduct and stuff makes sense to me.
I'm hearing no objection to doing that. I will take that as a yes. I'm just writing that in the notes.
Yeah. Oh, I just already did.
Okay, you're good then. Cool. Cool. So with that, we will do that. Miles, do you want to take that on?
I don't need to. If someone else would like to, they can.
Why don't you open the original issue with the suggestion and then...
Okay, yeah, I'll just open an issue right now.
Cool. Awesome. Is there, so one thing I will do, I will remove the label unless there's an objection. Cool, label's removed. And we can leave this issue open for now. And I believe we are good. Any other discussions around this? Cool. We will move on to the next agenda item then. Next agenda item is issue 130 in the Bootstrap repo. Create process for new projects joining the foundation. This is Miles created this from today's meeting, or not, sorry, I was beginning to read the issue. Miles, do you want to discuss this?
Yeah, so I owe you all some documentation on this, but apologies, I haven't been able to get to it yet. If anyone does want to take it on, please feel free to chime in, although I do think I will have time this week to dig in. Right now, our project proposal, we have a proposal process, we have a project progression doc, we have the charter, but nothing's really documented around how projects that want to join the foundation are able to do so. So I wanted to create some documentation for that, as well as documented process. One of the other things about this that, is kind of good too is, most of our proposals that we had up until now have involved creating new documents rather than augmenting existing documents. So I was hoping to also have an example of, how to do so. My thought right now is actually not too different from how we have handled charter changes in Node up until now. So the thought was that I would create one PR that would make the changes to the appropriate documents, and then a second PR for the proposal information that would reference the initial PR. And that initial PR would not land until the point that the proposal had reached stage 3. Some of the stuff that I wanted to capture within this proposal, I think one of the most important bits was finding the balance between transparency as well as being fair to new projects thinking about joining. So to be very explicit here, I think that there are some projects which may just be, a total win and totally obvious that everyone in the foundation is on board and definitely want them to join. But there may be other projects that could be slightly controversial. And depending on the size of those projects, it may not make sense for them to publicly state that they're looking to join the foundation if, our foundation is going to turn around and then be like, hey, it doesn't make sense for you to join. So one of the things that I want to document, and I'd be most interested in getting some feedback on, I'm thinking about this concept of a quiet period. And the idea would be, a period whereby a mailing list that reaches, as many people in the foundation that want to be part of it can be emailed stating, Project A is interested in joining the foundation. If anyone has extremely high level concerns about them joining, please raise it now during this quiet period. And after the quiet period, their, intent to join can be made public, at which point they can start participating in CPC meetings in a non-voting and non-consensus role. One of the biggest reasons for this too is that I think that once people start in the process of trying to join, we'll have a checklist of expectations, and that's something that's being independently worked on from here. But when something in that checklist isn't reached, it's really easy for us to point and say, hey, you need to have a license from this amount, or you need to implement a code of conduct, or you need to have N number of members on your steering committee that aren't all from one company. I'm not suggesting that those are necessarily exactly what they'll be, but those are very practical and explicit things that we can point out that people can correct. But if we're talking about something that's, I don't think I have a better way of framing it as a culture fit, or a project just not being aligned with our mission. If there are projects that we're just going to say no to based fundamentally on who or what that project is, I think that we need to find a way to identify that early so that we don't have projects making, a public statement that they're going to join, have potentially multiple months of work, and then having objections showing up in CPC meetings, months down the line, just saying, oh, this project doesn't, align with our goals. So I'm trying to find a way to, make that easier. To some of our earlier conversations that had been brought up, that you can't always know everything going in. And of course, there may be objections that come later. But I would like as much as possible to minimize the potential of kind of wasting people's time or setting them up for failure. So that's what I hope to document. Are there any questions or concerns about, the way I've stated things?
I have a question.
Yep.
If some projects are would not be allowed to enter due to, like you said, some sort of culture fit, if this happens in like a silent period, then the foundation isn't ever publicly denying those projects to be added. So is that intentional or not? Because if they don't support the mission, then by saying nothing, the foundation is also sort of like almost implicitly supporting them. And I'm wondering if that's the intention or not.
I think the intention would be that the projects themselves would get that feedback, but I think it's to avoid, I don't think it's important, in my personal opinion, but I could be wrong, that we publicly state the projects that don't align with our mission. I don't think we have anything to gain by that. What I do think is important is that we don't start like a media or PR blitz around projects wanting to join that might be high profile or even low profile. I just don't think that's fair to the projects themselves.
Gotcha, cool.
Yeah, if you look at the Apache Software Foundation, they actually even have a blackout period, right, where they prefer that the project say nothing.
A question regarding if the criteria for actually joining the foundation later on have not been quite settled yet, has the decision effectively been made to just grandfather by fiat all of the pre-existing JSF projects, even if, hypothetically speaking, they would not fit in with the requirements for new projects?
My understanding is that all of the projects were asked, and as far as I know, none opted out. I could be wrong, but they were given the option to opt out. And last I knew, none had.
I also believe that kind of building on that, the intent would be that the entrance criteria that we make, that once we have them, all of the current projects in the foundation would dog food those entrance criteria. And that what we eventually settle on is the official entrance criteria. I would personally be quite surprised if all of the projects in our foundation, including those that have been brought in from the merger, all align with those expectations. I also know that there are a couple projects that are currently in that will move to an emeritus status, which is something we also need to document. So I think it will be possible that, a handful of the projects that perhaps are not able to meet those expectations, mostly because they're not as maintained, will likely move to that other status. But hopefully that's a fair enough answer to your question. My impression and hope is that every single project will meet that minimum expectations to enter, and that we will be able to fairly set those expectations for other projects.
Right. Now, I think it's actually a little stronger than that, in that we're forming it, and all of the projects who were in are in. It's subject to moving to the different levels, which we've asked about, and there's still a yearly review on that. But I don't think there's any notion of projects as part of the initial formation, all the projects are in, right? Now, over time, they need to adopt the sort of cross-project things like the code of conduct and stuff like that. But
yeah, I think the annual review is a big important one there too. So I think that on an annual basis, we would be, as a committee, the cross-project council, which anyone can come and participate in from all the projects, would be reviewing all the projects and ensuring that they're maintaining those expectations. I don't think that we've quite gone through and codified a worst-case scenario there. but I think that the general intention, would be that we are setting these as expectations for projects and that they would maintain those expectations.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. So what are the next steps here, Miles?
I owe everyone some actual documentation.
Okay, cool. Are there any additional questions for Miles on this specific issue 130 in Bootstrap? Cool. We can move on. Miles, do you think we should leave the agenda item on that?
I think so, and then the agenda item will tie to a PR.
Cool.
Or a couple PRs.
Sounds good. Cool. With that, we can move on then. The next agenda item is review meeting times, issue 129. I believe the Google spreadsheet was sent out. So this is more of a please do this. This specific issue 129, has a Google sheet that Jory posted in it. Here is the link to it. If you could please fill in that sheet as much as possible, that would be awesome. There's a legend at the bottom that tells you what the numbers mean. There are also 2 sheets there. There is Tuesday and Wednesday. If you could fill in the times that would be best, that would help us make sure that we're getting best for you. That would help us make sure that we're getting the most optimal times for everyone that's interested in participating in this meeting.
We might want to set some sort of target for when we're going to say, okay, that's it. It's been open for, I think, 2 weeks at least.
Yeah. Do we want to set that as the next meeting?
That sounds reasonable.
Should you wait until the other projects have updated with their representatives?
So something we've done in the past over in the TSD is adjusted the times, and then on a periodic basis, we actually have some algorithm that can crawl this chart and then spit out a couple suggested times based on a balance of time zones, as well as like diversity, making sure that everyone can meet a certain number of meetings. So, I think we got to figure out how disruptive we want to be, but I think that we can adjust the time more than once for what it's worth. So I think that if we look at the sheet and look at the times that come up based on the sheet and they're radically different than what we currently have, it may make sense for us to, adjust the time now and then change that again in about like 2 or 3 months time when we have more people involved.
Super. Yeah, although I do take the point that, if we're just identifying the people in a month, we're going to have a bunch of new people. It may be worthwhile planning for a change then. Doesn't mean we shouldn't change between, if it's not the best time for people who are currently participating, but I think we should allow for after, say, the first CPC meeting, maybe that's a good time to, we're planning to do that at the summit. Maybe right after that would be a good time to review it.
Is there a timeline on that? I assume identifying the representatives. I assume that's the summit is the deadline.
That's our hard deadline, I guess, or as hard as you can make it. We had set a target for May 1st.
Okay. Well, so that roughly aligns. Do we want to set that target for that date as the shutoff as well?
That may be a good idea.
Okay. So we will set that. I will comment in that issue. As to that. Cool. Cool. And with that, I think we can move on unless anyone else has anything to say on this. Cool. So the next agenda, just final thing, please fill that out. That'd be awesome if you could. Cool. Moving on to the next agenda item, project housekeeping, create checklist for new projects / update existing projects. This is issue 121 from Jory. Jory, do you have an update on this?
Not much of one. I just want to thank everyone for helping it land. I believe last week while I was out for the W3C meeting. So I believe that landed as a stage 0 or stage 1 proposal. And I'm imagining that the next steps are actually to figure out which folks are going to be kind of leading different kind of validation checks for ensuring that each of those bullet points gets done or has been kind of, identified who's gonna make sure those things get done, and that would be I think the next step of that particular proposal, which I would very much like to get that done in the next couple of days so people can weigh in on that. But I haven't had any other additions to the list so far. And so I think we're capturing the obvious stuff for sure.
Probably that issue can close now, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've caught everything that we may add to it, on down the road, but yeah.
But that's likely a PR to the doc we landed.
Yeah.
Cool. Any objection to closing that issue?
None.
Cool. I'm also going to remove the label and then close it. Cool. That issue is now closed. Congratulations. Cool. Any other discussion around that checklist, specifically the merged PR? Cool. We can move on then. The final agenda item is steps to Bootstrap CPC and new foundation, issue 115 in the Bootstrap repo. Cool. Michael, do you have an update on this?
Yep. So we can just sort of walk through as mentioned already, I've checked off a few which we actually landed, which was a checklist of projects. Initial email lists, I think we talked about earlier in the meeting. We can close that one, check that one off.
Cool. I will check that.
I just did open the next one, land common code of conduct in OpenJS.org. I think that one, I was hoping when I last looked just for a few more. Oops, I got the wrong. Sorry, I have the wrong link there. Just getting to that one. So that's 139. Oops. Yeah. Hold on.
It's issue or PR 147, I believe.
Right, 147. So that one we have a few more okays. I think that it sounded like we might want to land that in the admin repo instead. I guess it's like, it might be good if people just scan through it, and if we don't have any objections, we could have the agreement to land it, and I could wait to land it in the admin repo. But it'd be good. I think it's been open for at least 2 or 3 weeks. If we could get people to say, yeah, that looks fine, to go ahead.
Cool.
So if we give people maybe just a minute and then ask if there's any objections, would be my suggestion.
Cool. So if you're wondering, that PR is 147. Nobody linked it. Cool. I linked it in the Zoom chat. It looks like it is the contributor covenant 1.4.1. And then with the changes needed to add lists and the proper phrasing of OpenJS Foundation. Yeah,
and I guess the one thing I could point out is I think in many cases people take that and then make modifications in line. I didn't do that. I left it as a reference. The good thing about that is you get the translations without having to actually translate them. So I basically said, here's a reference to the code of, the one we're using, and then where you would normally fill in information, like here's the reporting email addresses, those are documented in this document itself. And then it adds the escalation part, which is, if you're not happy with what happened after you did a report, here's how you escalate.
Awesome. Cool.
Okay, so any objections to that landing? People want more time or comfortable that it goes ahead?
Michael, you're talking specifically about the code of conduct pull request?
Yes.
Okay.
And you've got 5 approvers, including myself. I think it looks good, and we can always update it.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, the next thing on the checklist is the new Zoom and YouTube.
So the YouTube is set up. I have the credentials, although I got them late in the week last week and haven't logged in, haven't shared them with anybody, but I can do that. As far as Zoom goes, I've been tracking down which Zoom accounts we have, essentially which ones we're using, and if there are any that we are not. We don't need to do it on this call, but it would be helpful to know which Zoom account we're using for this call. I did find one that that we can use for other things. It's not a webinar account, but it is one that's already established. So then the question is, essentially which one is this one, and we'll work it out from there. What I'm trying to do here, though, is there may be 2 things to note. One is that I'm trying to get a complete inventory of all of the Zoom accounts that we're using, so that makes sure we're not using too many of them. The other thing is that since webinar licenses like this one are reasonably expensive, and I have gotten some requests coming in for other groups, other projects that would like to use these, trying to understand how many of the meetings actually need to be streamed 100% live to YouTube and how many can be recorded and posted afterwards, because that will change certainly the number of Zoom accounts that we can fit into the budget. So this is worth an offline discussion. I think we could very rapidly get off of the weeds here during this call. But it's just wanted to update that I'm following up on this.
So some quick answers to those high-level questions you asked, though. This meeting is being run off of the node.js-meetings at linuxfoundation.org account.
Great.
Then currently all of our meetings, it's a pretty hard requirement that we live stream.
Yeah.
And then one thing that I'll just add really quickly, at Cloud Next, Google announced that Meet, which is the replacement for Hangouts, will soon have streaming capabilities and up to a fairly large number of active participants. So I'll run some experiments and see if it's possible, but we may also be able to look at using a free version of Meet instead of Zoom, and be able to do the meetings. We had in the past used Hangouts, but we were hitting the limit of how many people we could have in the meeting at the same time, which was part of the reason for switching to these other platforms.
That makes sense.
One thing to check out when you take a look at that is to make sure we can have like a single URL that gets reused for every meeting.
Yeah.
Like a different one for each meeting, but we want to reuse it because those webinars make it a lot easier in terms of generating the meetings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a bit of a philosophical question, but at least for Zoom, the meeting participant limit is 100 people. And I guess one of the questions that I have here as well is, do we anticipate that can we accomplish the same thing we accomplished with putting, live streaming on YouTube, but just having everybody in the same meeting? I don't know what our typical load is on our live stream, but one of the questions would be, if you can contain everybody who's in the meeting plus the live streamers in the meeting limit, does it make sense to just invite people to be directly in the meeting?
I think that may start getting confusing because as it is right now, we have lots of different people who are showing up and we're basically making everyone panelists. If everyone is in the same meeting and understanding who can participate and who can't, might be hard. And then for certain teams like the TSC, for example, like there's an explicit desire to have that kind of separation.
Okay.
The
Makes
other
sense.
thing I'll add too is, like, the way it is now, it just shows up published. Somebody doesn't have to go off and do something afterwards, and that's a big thing, at least in my mind.
That is, yes, absolutely.
Right? So like if it's like, okay, you didn't live stream, but it actually showed up, maybe if it's like, well, no, somebody actually then has to go and upload and do a bunch of stuff, that would be a big concern too.
Where that becomes an issue is if you have multiple meetings happening at the same time, because only one group can stream at a time.
Yep.
So I think at that point, then we need to look at doing some traffic control. But these are all hypothetical questions for situations that we haven't even run into, at least not.
Well, we do in the Node community actually, but we use our calendar as the flow control in terms of making sure there's like usually only one meeting scheduled, and that's the meeting that gets the live stream.
Yeah, we've run into that multiple times. That said, if other projects are interested, I don't think you're going to convince the Node project to move off of our YouTube channel. It would just be the CPC and other OpenJS Foundation meetings that would go on the new channel, which if we also follow that model for other projects, if they want to have their own channel, they can do that, which eliminates the need to maintain like an org-wide calendar that serves the same purpose as what we do with the Node.js calendar, which basically allows us to make sure we're not overlapping.
Makes a ton of sense. That makes a ton of sense. I mean, I think certainly the projects, my anticipation is they'd want to keep their subject matter reasonably contained, so it's easy to point people into the appropriate place, and it also helps manage traffic as well. That's a good point.
Okay, so I guess do you need any more information in terms of what Zoom we're using?
I have all the information I need, at least right now. I think I'd be very interested to hear, Miles, what you find out about Meet, because that could solve the issue of, we get a fairly substantial number of projects. Everybody wants a webinar license. It suddenly becomes a fairly substantial operational cost here. So if there's a way to do this in a cost-effective way, then that would be awesome.
I guess one question I have is, my understanding of how the TSC and ComCom accounts work is that they're accounts of the same license. Is that true, or are they 3 licenses?
I just have a login, which I think is the same login that everyone else uses, but we can only run a single webinar at the same time.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I didn't know we had a separate TSC one, to be honest.
Yeah, there's
a
TSC account and a ComCom account and the official account.
Because you can't run more than one webinar at the same time, like regardless of the YouTube. Okay. I thought per account, I think that's why we had to get separate ones, so that we could potentially be using them for sessions, not necessarily for broadcasting, but at the same time.
Gotcha.
So what I'm hearing is that maybe I need to track down. I would be interested to know actually where those TSC and ComCom accounts are coming from, and how they're being paid for. So not that I'm trying to.
I mean, Brian, as far as I know, Annie set those up for us.
Okay.
LF.
So I will attempt to track those down then. What I'm trying to do here, again, just so that everybody understands my motivation here. I'm just trying to get everything organized, as we are, going from essentially 2 separate organizations to one that now has many projects underneath it. I just want to make sure we understand where everything is and what assets are available and all of that. So it's more for the purposes of inventory management than anything else.
Does it make sense to create an issue to track some of this stuff, Brian?
Sure.
Great.
Sure, I can do that.
Okay, so next action on that is Brian will create an issue, put some info, and we'll leave it on. We'll leave it here as still a to-do until we actually get the credentials into people's hands.
That sounds good.
And okay, but for next week we'll continue the way we're going. So
cool.
Next thing on the list that's not checked off is work with projects to identify initial CPC representatives. Jory, I know you've done a few things on that front. If you want to
Yeah, so I've opened an issue on every single project repository except for Node and Express and LibUV. So all of the JS Foundation projects. I know Node's already working on it because, I mean, in case you weren't aware, we're looking for a representative from the Node project. Just kidding. So we've got a few folks who've nominated from the at-large and growth projects for one of the sort of at-large voting seats, and then Appium gets the gold star for having their reps in first. And I know that there are a couple of other projects that are taking a few more days, I think, to consider. But at least I feel they've been appropriately harassed on this particular.
Okay. Sounds good. Are the Appium reps here?
I don't believe they are here.
Jonah's
I am.
Dan,
Okay.
oh, hi, Dan.
Oh, hi. So
Hello.
welcome.
Hi. Hi. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, Jonah. Excited you're here.
Hi. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, and on the Node.js front, there was a discussion item that was opened on how we would elect the two representatives. We came to consensus. We've got an issue open in the TSC repo for proceeding on the TSC electing one representative, and I talked to Adam, who was going to spin up that process on the ComCom side as well. So I think that's all there is to say on that front. Unless anybody has anything else to add.
I hate to be a stickler, but should we have an issue tracking this one as well?
We could point to, I can add the link to the TSC issue.
Okay.
Let me
I
find,
think we do have an issue tracking at least the members who have raised their hands, correct?
Yeah, I have an issue where I'm tracking just this more broadly. Is that what you mean, Joe?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I am. Let me go see what number that is.
Right, so that's issue.
I think Nick just dropped it in, number 152. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to throw the Bootstrap agenda label on there, and we can just keep that as just something that we can reference in the meetings and keep everyone updated as to where it's at.
Yep, I'm going to add that as a link here too, so that it's, and I can, 152, I can add to that the link for the TSC one. Let's just do that quickly.
As a question or observation on this, hi, Emily. I'm likely to be one of the two message format participants in the CPC. The main thing I joined in today to find out is more detail on what are the actual expectations of joining the CPC. The charter seems to ask for some time commitment, doesn't really specify that. I think the most specific question that I'm looking for is there an expectation of physically joining any meetings, or are the activities of the CPC going to be almost entirely handled electronically?
As far as I know, they'll almost be entirely electronic. We do have, at least historically in the Node Foundation, we've done 2 collaborator summits a year. We're planning one just before JSConf EU and then another one at Node plus JS Interactive. So I think we would like to see as many of those members attend those meetings as possible, and we have a travel fund to help fund those whose organizations aren't able to send them. But with that being said, we recognize that people are in different countries around the world and have, different, mobility, like ability to travel. So it's not a hard requirement. I think one thing also worth mentioning, I'm assuming everyone does know this, but only the impact level projects get to nominate representatives. The growth and at-large projects get to nominate people, and then as a whole, that there will be 2 people voted from that whole list. So the impact projects are Node, jQuery, Dojo, Appium, and Webpack. Each of them get to nominate 2, and then they're immediately made voting members. All the other projects can nominate up to 2, but those members will then have to vote within them to pick the 2 from that list.
Right, and to go on from that, but then every project can send as many regular members as they would like to as well.
Yes. So anyone can come and attend the meetings at any time. You do not need to be a voting member to attend the meetings or participate in consensus. The voting members are more there as, to help with extremely high level things, to interface more directly with the board, for the rare occasion where we need to vote on something, although in general, we want to try to reach consensus on things and not require votes.
Yeah, I would say, though, that just to sort of get back to that point of expectation management around participation, I think we've seen this in some of the projects where like requiring like a certain number, like attendance of meetings isn't the outcome, it doesn't get the outcome that we want. And especially with trying to be cognizant of time zones, we want to make sure that people are participating and engaged in the CPC work. But yeah, that doesn't necessarily mean showing up for a meeting. It means that as the CPC moves forward, they need to make sure to be mindful of that, and especially do things like decision-making, voting in formats like, email distributed vote, to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak up without having to be like, in one time and in a meeting, unless it's absolutely necessary.
But Tracy does point out a good thing, that the things that really are expected are like anything that will hold up the business. If you're a voting member and there's a vote and you never vote, then that's kind of holding up the business of the group.
Right, and we would just want to make sure that somebody else could step up then, right? If you're not able to participate, and also doing things like having the ability for an alternate, so that you can wave the white flag and say, I need somebody else to stand in this week. I will make sure that they have the context needed in order to represent, that sort of thing.
So one quick question, do we need to time box this discussion to get to the other points in issue 115, or are we good to continue this? I am not sure how much time the others will take, so I want to make sure, since we're at 8 minutes, that we can get to those if we need to.
It might be worth just touching on those and then coming back if we have time, because like you said, there's only 8 minutes left. But
yeah, let's do that then. Do you want to take that, Michael?
So the next one is to document, define the initial process for handling reports. I think Manil had volunteered to do that. I haven't had a chance to look to see if there is an open issue for it or not yet. Let's just see. Okay, I don't see that yet, so I guess we'll just leave it on today. And then the last one, which I added, was to create an admin repo, which we discussed earlier, and to land some initial docs. I'll actually put the link in there. And then it's, based on things we've been discussing or what's been going on since last time, are there any other things we should add to this checklist?
So one thing I was thinking about is like a process for new projects to propose their project, like a project proposal checklist or template. I don't know if that belonged here, Michael.
So we have that as part of the project progression, and if we want to revisit, if we want to like revise what we have, we should definitely take another pass at that.
But does the progression document state like, go here to submit a new project proposal? And I don't have it in front of me.
Open an issue, but I don't think that's going to be comfortable for all projects. So we should probably propose some different options.
I think the other thing too is that those proposals are not easily discoverable. So we probably need something on the README, or like we need something that, even if that's where the actual detail is, we need something that when you come to the GitHub repo, you say, okay, yes, I understand. If I want to join, here's what I do, and okay, I go read this, and then so forth.
Yeah.
So maybe the checklist thing to add in is add the entry point. Add entry point for projects wanting to join on README MD and review project progression. That makes sense. No objections. I guess I'll put it that we can always update the bullet point, but anybody want to volunteer for that one?
I can help with that.
Okay. And then that's actually the end of the list. So if we have a few minutes, we could go back to the one we were discussing earlier.
Cool.
Sort of related, possibly continuing. I'm not seeing among the checklist how the nominees for the representatives from at-large projects actually get selected initially during the bootstrapping.
Right. I think we may have. I'm trying to remember what we said in the governance. So let's go take a look at that.
I believe that it was an election process, but we should have something explicit. But I think that's really up in the air.
I think it may have been set, a process to be set by the CPC. If I remember, I just wasn't 100% sure.
I think that's what we have. I mean, and somebody asked this on another project, and I was candid that I think we have a tiny bit of a chicken and an egg problem where we need the CPC to be formed so that we can form the CPC when it comes to like doing this election from the at-large and the growth projects. But I'm hoping if we get quite a good contingency of participants from those projects into these meetings now, we can shape something that makes sense to everybody and kind of evolve from there.
Yeah, it basically just says up to 2 voting members may be nominated by the non-impact projects based on a process set by the CPC. So I guess our decision is, does that just wait until the CPC is formed, or do we need to do something in advance of that?
Oh, I thought the idea is that we could arguably draft stuff, but that the CPC needs to be the one to like accept and finalize it.
Right. So it's kind of like this is how you get the voting members, but it's contingent on getting the initial voting members, the initial CPC formed.
Yeah.
Like, I guess it's like, does anybody have a concern in waiting on that until we have the initial CPC? Or is it that, we need to have those representatives right from the beginning?
Yeah, I guess the scale of how we want to do that voting and who's responsible for that voting, I don't see a reason why the Bootstrap team can't kind of figure that out, or at least make a suggestion for it. But I could understand wanting to wait until the other CPC members have been identified, but I don't feel like this group of participants is going to change too much between now and then. So
there's another way to look at this, Miles, which is that we draft a process, use it to bootstrap, and then the CPC has to ratify or change it for the next election.
I like that personally.
Right. So I think that I'm comfortable with us doing that as well. Does anybody have any concerns or think like it really is like, yeah, is it better to get the process so that we can get some initial representatives along with all the rest, or is there any concern that the new CPC will say, well, wait a sec, that wasn't right? And if there isn't, then it's probably an easy decision.
I don't see any.
For...
Please go, Sarah. Sorry.
Hey. Yes, sorry. I think particularly for the aspects of inclusion, that having some of the at-large and growth projects represented as we make these decisions to how we build the CPC, getting them involved as soon as possible with a voice that is clear and potentially voting for the couple of seats that are there is important, because otherwise it starts to look really skewed toward the large projects, and we really don't want, or the impact project, my apologies, we really don't want that to ever be the perception. We want it to be as broadly impactful as possible. Too many words overloaded.
I plus one that. I mean, on this particular issue, I'd love to hear like Nick and, you know, Emily and, you know, Chris Hiller and some of these folks from that have been keeping up with what we're doing, kind of like champion a proposal they'd like to see, for example.
So I do just want to share that it's 10. We should try to wrap this up. So with that, I think, you know, are there any next steps that we'd like to suggest to kind of move this discussion offline and progress on it?
I think, you know, we should add a check bullet point, which is to draft the initial process. And I think Jory was wondering if, like, Nick or Nick, who is on the call,
yep,
like if you'd be interested in volunteering to do that first draft.
I don't feel I would know where to begin with such a first draft, I'd have to say. I'm happy to work with someone on that. But
okay, so I'm happy to volunteer to work with you on that.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll say Michael/Nick to work on that. And just, I know we're over time, but the other thing I'll throw out there is we also have a similar one where we can have up to 2 voting members nominated from the regular members. And it's a similar, like, you know, is that something we need to figure out now, or can we wait till we've got the CPC representative, the rest of the voting representatives identified?
But are there any regular members existing already?
I don't know that we haven't actually made a call that says, does anybody want to self-nominate as a regular member?
The easy answer here is to not do that until the bootstrapping is ready. And then once that happens, then you have regular members and then you can do that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. I just thought we should make an explicit decision. Cool. So any objections to waiting on that front? You know, once we have the voting members in place, then we'll open it up for regular members and the process can be set.
No objection. Cool.
Okay.
Awesome. And is that all of the items that we had to do to cover for that? Cool. With that, we can wrap this up. As you know, as we mentioned at the top, there is an issue for this week's meeting. If you want to go over the agenda items, we will also be PRing the minutes in. Additionally, if you were in this meeting and haven't left already, but we're not here at the beginning, we'd love to get your name in the attendance. So if you could add that, that would be fantastic. And with that, we can wrap this up. I am pasting that doc into the attendance or into the chat, Zoom chat, for those who weren't here. But otherwise, we're going to wrap this up. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.